When I was in college, as a non-technical person, I did not know how to get started with startups. I thought that I needed to be the founder because I would be leading the business side of things and I couldn't do anything else. Then my technical friend brought me into his team and I became more of a marketing sort of person, and I was doing a lot of the marketing stuff. When I was working on the marketing stuff, it was great until a year in where I had nothing left to do because we had launched and most of the issues were product related. It was time to listen to our customers, and as a non-specialized person in any specific domain, I didn't really know what to do with myself. A few years later down the line, while I've been more into the startup game and into the tech game, I realized that there's a lot of roles that don't require you to be technical and still be important and still have relevance into a startup team. Today, I wanted to discuss the one role that I think is really important that a lot of people don't do, which is the fundraising expert. The amazing thing about being a fundraising expert is that you don't need to know how to code, you don't need to know how to design wireframes, you don't need to know how to use Photoshop. You just need to know how to read a book, do basic math, and be able to talk to people or communicate with people. When you're working on a startup, there's going to be the product team. The guys that are working on the software engineering side, the product management side, the designers. However, it is left to the founder to figure out how the fundraising aspect is going to be carried out. Now, contrary to popular belief, fundraising is not as simple of a process as people might think it is. When you leave a fundraising to the founder, it becomes really a distraction just because of the nitty-gritty details that really need to be considered into this whole process. In this video, I just want to make the case that a fundraising expert is really necessary to early stage, pre-seed, seed stage startups to have a fundraising expert. Now, what is a fundraising expert? To summarize, a fundraising expert is just going to be the guardian that guides the founder and the startup team how to allocate their equity and how to think about how money is coming in versus what they're giving away as equity. Here's what you will be doing as a fundraising expert. Number one, you'll need to understand the different series and stages of fundraising. So there's angel investing, pre-seed, seed, series A, series B, all the way to series Z if you want. You will need to understand all these different stages, what they mean, and what is more appropriate for your startup at any given stage. At each stage, you'll need to understand how much money is allocated to you and how much you're giving away and what's a reasonable given. Step number two, you'll need to know how equity distribution is done within a startup. So that means you'll need to understand how the founders are distributing their equity amongst each other, how investors are getting equity distributed amongst each other, how future investors are going to have equity distributed amongst each other. There is the concept of a simple agreement for future equity, also known as s.a.f.e. You understanding s.a.f.e. will make it easy for your startup team to also understand what money they're bringing into the team versus how much equity they're giving out and how much their own shares are getting diluted in the process. Number three, you'll need to understand how a startup values itself. As much of a delusional process as it is, giving a price on your startup is really important. However, people can get really delusional, like for example, you have 0 customers and you're putting a $5 million price on your startup with 0 IP and 0 things to bring to the table. However, as a fundraising expert, you'll need to understand the perspective of investors as well, and you'll need to be able to sell the image of your startup to these investors using what you already know about these investors. So as much as a delusional process it is, you'll need to bring that delusion to a bit of a reality and make it work for your startup and for the investors and put a realistic price to it. Step number 4, you'll need to be crystal clear about how much money you guys are raising as a startup. How much money are you bringing into the startup? What are you doing with that money? How long is that money going to last you? When are you going to break even? When are you going to make a profit? Etc, etc. You'll need to be able to prompt your startup team with these questions before you even approach investors. Or if your team has a financial analyst, a financial guy, some people like to call these finance people the CFO on the team, that person might be responsible for doing this analysis. However, the fundraising expert will be focusing more on what these numbers mean to the investor rather than what it means to the internal team. Number 5, you will need to understand the documents required when it comes to fundraising. So whether it is the executive summary, the business plan, the pitch deck, the term sheets, you, the fundraising expert, will need to know all these documents, everything that is necessary, and be able to know of them, understand what each of them means, and understand the relevancy of each of them to your startup and to the investors. Number 6, you'll need to understand incorporation. So by understanding incorporation, I don't mean the nitty-gritty details. It is a pretty simple step. However, incorporating in a state that makes the investors more confident in investing in you because they understand the laws and regulations in these states will be more sensible to you. So for example, a lot of investors recommend startups to get incorporated in Delaware. So if that makes sense to you, maybe you would recommend your startup to get incorporated in Delaware or Florida or whatever state that is relevant to you and the investors that you're scouting. Number 7, you will basically keep in touch with all the fundraising rounds that are happening around the country. You will keep in touch with all these activities, with all the money that's being raised around the country, who's raising what. Just keep tabs of things and keep it at the back of your head so that whenever your startup is ready to take money in, you will be the guy who knows the guy. Also, understanding this landscape of who's giving money to who will help you understand whether a particular person or a particular VC firm is more appropriate for your startup because they're more likely to give money to your category and as well as bring value to the table. For example, if you're dabbling in the edtech B2B space, it would feel more enticing to you and your startup to be raising money from Learn VC, for example. These guys might also bring their network on top of bringing the money to the table, which might be valuable to you and make you move faster. So the fundraising expert might be more knowledgeable in advising you to do that rather than the founder or the team doing that research for themselves. And the last point is the fundraising expert should be looking for equity-free money that is on the table, that is available for the startup to grab. For example, what if there's a random pitch competition happening in downtown Chicago that your team is relevant to participate in? Get 50 grand from that without giving away any equity. You, the fundraising expert, will need to be on the lookout for such opportunities so that you can just simply prepare a pitch deck, go pitch, bring the money in, and get the money to get your startup going. Alright, maybe you're intimidated at this point, or maybe you feel like this is all pretty doable, and that's great. But what do you need to do before you get to the stage of being able to act on these things? Step number 1, read the book Venture Deals by Brad Feld and Jason Mendelsohn. I'm not sponsored by any of these guys, but I've read the book in the past and it has helped me make decisions when I was trying to fundraise for my startup. The book contains a lot of valuable information. It's very detailed. It contains a lot of information. You, the fundraising expert, needs to know this book back and front. Step number 2, understand the term sheet. The book Venture Deals explains what a term sheet is, but you personally need to go ahead and do research about what a term sheet is. Do your own research, go on the internet, ask ChatGPT maybe what a term sheet is, and try to figure out exactly what it means for your startup and for the investor. The term sheet basically establishes the relationship between your startup and the investor. So the fundraising expert needs to make sure that they understand what that means and what it's going to mean by the time fundraising happens. Step number 3, start researching about investors. Pull up that Excel sheet, start dropping all the names of the investors that you can think about, start tabulating all the startups that fit your category probably, and start tracking the patterns that you can identify from each VC, each angel investor. And step number 4, understand s.a.f.e. Understanding s.a.f.e. and understanding the different versions that are available within s.a.f.e. and understanding what is appropriate for you and what you guys are trying to do will be really important for down the line when it comes to fundraising. Now, that role might lead you to the same situation that I amounted to when I was in college. Like, at some point, you have nothing left to do. Well, in that field, there's always so much research and so much information that you can gather for your startup to be valuable. But however, if you still find yourself in that stage, here's what you could do. You could basically advise multiple startups at once for what they're trying to fundraise in. You can just go advise multiple startups on how they're fundraising, how they're distributing equity, and give advice and maybe take some equity in return. Who knows, one of the startups that you're advising might actually exit and you might actually get rich. Number 2, if you have nothing to do, Keep doing research, keep staying up to date with the landscape, keep trying to figure out what you can do, and keep trying to figure out what other investors and people around you are doing in your area. At some point, this information will come key when you're trying to fundraise. Step number 3, if you have nothing to do, build your network. Reach out to these investors. Alright, worst case scenario, let's say you did all these steps, you worked with startups, you became a fundraising expert for multiple startups or one startup, and all the startups fail, all the groups disband, whatever. What happens to you? Well, the worst case scenario is that you are failing forward and you can use the experience that you've garnered from all these startups and you just go work for a VC firm as an analyst or as an advisor. Do you care about making 250 grand per year, living in Palo Alto, Bay Area, while working for a top shot VC firm based on the experiences that you've accumulated while failing at previous startups? Yeah, maybe you want that. Who knows? That's it. That's my advice for non-technical people that I have realized a bit later in my life. And I hope that at least one person in the entire world that's watching this video takes this advice and becomes successful from the advice. All right. Bye.